humans have lived for 90 up to 99% of their time on Earth as hunter-gatherers. Now, not all hunter-gatherers can be put in the same group. There are differences among them. And for the earliest part, there's one major work that has been done by Alain Testard. Here it is, who made a deep sociological analysis of the Australian Aborigines during the 19th at the turn of the 20th century. And here's what he found. Those communities are based on an extremely strict reciprocal type of relation of production and of reproduction. For example, a hunter who hunts a prey, a kangaroo, and brings it back to the camp, leaves the prey to the rest of the community, and he withdraws. And very often he doesn't even eat from what he has hunted. This is very striking. The production is denied to the producer, to the benefit of the community as a whole. When we look precisely, the hunt goes to usually his father-in-law. This shows that all the relations of production in this community are based on kinship. Kinship is really what struck all ethnographers working generally with hunter-gatherers and especially with those in Australia. The way people are related to each other shows the way they produce for themselves. Here's how the community is always divided in at least two subgroups. Let's say A and B. And this goes especially for the reproduction. People from A can only marry someone from B and vice versa. This is called exogamy, marrying outside. So this is why all communities are divided in at least two. Then they're called moieties, halves. There can be many more divisions. Because of exogamy, a hunter, let's say A, marries a woman in B. The community is generally matrilineal. That means you get your social identity from your mother. So hunter who's A gets his social identity as A from his mother. His wife, who's B, gets her own social identity from her B mother. Hunters give his hunt to someone who's very distinct, socially speaking, from him. So we see that it's not just production, but it's also reproduction, the exogamy. And this is not found in later hunter-gatherers. Now, Australian Aborigines are conceived by Alain Testard as being a reflection of the earliest types of hunter-gatherers. Because, well, technologically speaking, they have no bows and arrows. So there must be a reflection of Paleolithic societies. And they're the only ones. They're the only hunter-gatherers known from ethnography that do not have bows and arrows. All the others do, for example, the Kung in southern Africa, in the Kalahari Desert, or the Inuits, Alaska or Greenland or northern Canada. Those hunter-gatherers have a different way of sharing their meat. Usually, it's the person who is conceived as the owner of the hunt. This can be defined by different ways. For example, some Inuits define the owner as the hunter who first saw the bear or the whale, or some of them consider that it's the one who actually killed the animal, etc. What matters is that when the hunt is brought back to the camp, whether the Inuits or the San group in Kalahari, the distribution of the meat is made according to the owner of the hunt. And that's an extremely huge gap in conception. In the Aborigines, the concept of ownership does not exist, or it is completely annihilated from the start when the prey is directly appropriated by the community. In later hunter-gatherers, prey is still shared. It is shared among the entire community so that everybody can eat, but it's distributed according to one particular person, the producer. The way they marry with each other also changes in time, and it does not totally correspond with the what ethnographers call the Iroquois type of marital exchange. The Australian usually marry among cross cousins. Since you get your social identity from your mother, your cross cousin is the children of your mother's brother, because children get their social identity from the mother. It's a little complicated, but it works very well. Cross cousins do not have the same social identity, and therefore they can marry. The main rule of exogamy is never, never to marry, but in fact to have any sexual relationship with someone from your own group. We see that it evolves in time with hunter-gatherers who happen to have bows and arrows. Of course, the fact that they have bows and arrows do not directly change the way they marry, but it shows that there is a different type of society and a different type of social relations of production. The social relation of production is really the key factor to understand how a society works, any society from any time. And the social relations of production is about who makes what, who gets what. So that's the answer to this double question. And in Australian Aborigines, one never gets what he produces, and he gets necessarily what others produce. And this goes for the reproduction as well, because when a woman gives birth to children, she produces or reproduces for the other moiety, for the other subgroup, because her child, whether a male or a female, will get married with someone from the other moiety. So we see how production and reproduction actually follow the same rule. The point of it all is that hunters who have a very low technological development, like the Australian Aborigines, get their security, their social security, through the relations that they have within their own group. And this social relation tends to distend when technology gets more advanced, because the way they hunt and the efficiency of the hunting compensate for the security, maybe not having enough food at some point. The correlation of this in archaeological terms is that what we see among the Australian Aborigines is probably a reflection of what was going on among hunter-gatherers during the entire Paleolithic period. The Old Stone Age, million, maybe 2 million years, depending on where you start, up until the Mesolithic, so the Middle Stone Age, about 20,000 years ago. So that's a huge span of time. The only ethnographic reflection that we have is from Australia, as I said. The other hunter gatherers are Mesolithic types of hunter gatherers because they have bows and arrows. This is not very important. What is important is that they all have a way of sharing their meat centered around the producer, which is what was not going on before. So, of course, there's always a problem saying, well, maybe the Australian Aborigines are not universal, but it's we're talking about social structure. We are talking about very small communities where everyone's related to each other, very closely related. There's no really other way that a human society, deprived of any natural tools, except for communication, would survive as a species without this very strong interrelation in cooperation. So in Mesolithic, we are dealing with a very much more individualized ideology, but the ideology changes very, very slowly. And the effect of this individualization will not be felt before the next step, really, which is the advent of agriculture. That's another story which I will talk about in the next video. The evolution in the relations of production among hunter-gatherers. It's very important to understand how humanity will evolve thereafter. And more than that, it's important to understand generally how humans work as groups. Only with the primitive communist type of society, which the Australian Aborigines represent, only there can we see the exact relation between the area of production, reproduction, and the way it reflects on the ideology in very strictly reciprocal, that is, equal terms. To make this equality possible, they deny any form of individual property to the producers. And this is to the benefit of the community as a whole and over generations. When a hunter hunts and brings back food to his camp, it is not only for the people in the camp at that time, it's also, to use a modern terminology, he reimburses what his father produced and which he ate as an infant, and he also produces it for the elder generation who cannot hunt anymore. So it's a very complex but very efficient social security, which worked very well for maybe a million years, so well that the humans, in spite of their natural weakness compared to all other animals, in spite of this weakness, but because of this cooperation and not because of intelligence, intelligence is a consequence of this cooperation. And because of this cooperation, humans could survive very efficiently and so efficiently that it was ready to move on to the next stage, the advent of agriculture. I said that the relations of production and of reproduction, the way the communities are divided into subgroups, exchanging on a very reciprocal, that is, equal pattern in terms of food and in terms of sexual mates. This reflects on their ideology. And the ideology, the way people think, is of course very difficult to find in archaeology, but it can be read through the symbolism. Symbolism is the elements that people take from nature to mean something, to convey a message. We are, of course, talking about communities who have no knowledge of writing at all. And to convey a message, they take symbols from nature, readily understandable features, and they put it together to convey a meaning. Of course, this meaning is difficult to find, but because we know, Alain Testar's thorough analysis, we can find a way to understand what they meant. The main symbolic places from the Paleolithic period are the famous caves of Lascaux and Altamira, Cosquer, what are usually called the Franco-Cantabrian caves in southern France and northern Spain. When Picasso went into Altamira cave, he was absolutely stunned by the artistic representation that he saw there. I mean, they're really amazing in terms of artistry, but artistry was certainly not the point that those people were wanting to reach. First of all, because those paintings are found at the very depth of long caves, maybe 1 kilometer from the entrance. It's cold, it's completely dark, and it's obviously not made for display. Now, what we know of their relation of production can give us an idea. Leroy-Gourhan made an interesting analysis of those paintings, especially those of Lascaux, and he found that certain animal species, like the bull or the bison, are generally depicted on protruding parts of the cave wall. And other species, like the horse, are found in concave, hollow places of the cave wall. And he found that there's a relation to male and female. Horns is a male symbol. It's not just that, of course, it's male and female, which interaction only can produce children, can produce fertility. They represent the the subgroups of the society I was talking about earlier. What is represented there is a concept. It's a concept of the exogamy, of the fact that people from two social subgroups need to mate in order to have children. And this is forbidding the fact that you can mate with someone from your own group, even if the person in question is actually further from you in genetical terms. But this has no meaning for them. The importance is your social identity, which is something completely artificial. The fact that you decide that your social identity comes from either from your mother or from your father, but that is true for the entire community over and over generations. This is an artificial decision. Of course, it's not a conscious decision, but it happens through time. The whole community sticks to it so clearly that it is painted on what was probably for them the most symbolic places, that is those caves where these animal paintings were made. And the cave, of course, is a symbolic representation of the vagina of the earth. It is the wombs of the earth, and it's in the very wombs of the earth that those symbols of fertility of those two interactive parts are depicted, and it's obviously not random. So this shows how, for them, it was important, this reciprocal relation among subgroups, and therefore the very differentiation within the community into equal subgroups. So this shows how the society was conceived and was organized. It's all a matter of relations of production, the way people are organized among themselves, so as to secure the continuity of the group. This was also important because it will reflect on much later symbolism, and we will find the exact same dualistic representation of the two elements interacting with each other. This is the famous yin and the yang of the Chinese tradition. The yin is the female part, but it's also the night, it's the wet, it's the moon, and the yang is the dry, it's the summer, it's the sun, it's the male. And those two elements can only produce fertility by being interconnected absolutely with each other. So that's the yin and the yang symbol. And it's probably a very, very early type of mental construction. When I say early, the most extraordinary example maybe is this discovery made maybe 20 years ago or so in a French cave called the Bruniquel, inhabited by Neanderthals. And there they found that stalactites and stalagmites were arranged in one big circle, encircling two piles of stalactites. The stalactite is, of course, just like the horn of the bison, a very obvious phallomorphic symbol. It's a symbol of an erect penis, but it's nothing sexual about it. It's all about choosing one symbol from nature to represent one concept. This concept is masculinity, but it's also a group, a social group made of men and women. So that's why it's not just about masculinity. It's the group. A group conceives itself as male, but it's not a patriarchal representation. Patriarchal representation and the exploitation of women will come up later with agricultural societies. So far, it's only in terms of ideological representation that we talk, and we must think in terms of a symbolic exchange, which allows the society to reproduce smoothly. The main point is actually to redistribute the sexual mates within the community, because sexual mates are found within the community, they're never found outside. And so the community must be divided and strictly organized so as to allow for the reproduction. And this goes through very strict rules, and that is the exogamic rule, which is found everywhere. So that's where we found it among Neanderthals and among Magdalenians and Solutrians were the cultural group that produced the cave paintings of Altamira and Lascaux. And we will see that they're also found all the way to the Neolithic period. And this is why symbolism is important, because it is a door to have a look at how the society is organized internally.